In 1976, Congress passed a law that would have cost the wealthiest families in America hundreds of billions of dollars, and no one has ever fully explained how it quietly disappeared before anyone paid. Not one family was ever touched by it. By the end of this, you'll understand what that silence was worth, and why the people who buried it are still collecting. Most Americans have never heard the phrase stepped-up basis. But if you've ever inherited a house, a stock portfolio, or a piece of land, it already decided how much of that money you got to keep. Here's how it works. When your parents bought that house in 1968 for $40,000, that purchase price becomes the cost basis. If they sold it while alive for $600,000, they'd owe capital gains taxes on the difference, $560,000 of taxable profit. But if they die first and you inherit that house, something changes. The IRS resets the clock. The cost basis is stepped up to whatever the house is worth the day they died. You inherit it at $600,000. You sell it the next week for $600,000. You owe nothing. That's the rule. And in 1976, Congress voted to kill it. The Tax Reform Act of 1976 was 600 pages of overhaul. Deep inside it, in language almost no one outside estate attorneys understood, Congress eliminated the stepped-up basis entirely. They replaced it with something called carryover basis. Under carryover basis, you inherited not just the asset, you inherited your parents' original purchase price. Their old cost, their old exposure. That $40,000 basis on a $600,000 house was now your problem. Sell it and you'd owe capital gains on more than $500,000 in gains. Gains you never earned. Gains that accumulated across decades you weren't alive for. For families with serious accumulated wealth, this was a seismic shift. The provision was signed into law. It had a start date. January 1, 1977. Then nothing happened. Congress suspended it almost immediately. The explanation: the new rules were too complicated to administer. Accountants couldn't trace original cost basis on assets purchased 30 years before. Record keeping was incomplete. The paperwork would overwhelm the system. That explanation held for a year, then 3 years. Then in 1981, with almost no fanfare, Congress repealed the carryover basis provision entirely. The stepped-up basis was quietly restored as if 1976 had never occurred. The official story was administrative inconvenience. But the timeline doesn't survive scrutiny. By 1979, computing systems existed that could track asset records. The IRS already required cost-basis documentation for other transactions. The paperwork problem was the same one Congress acknowledged when it passed the law in the first place, and they passed it anyway. What changed between 1977 and 1981 wasn't technology. What changed was who had time to organize. Here is the number no one likes to say out loud. In a single recent year, the stepped-up basis provision allowed an estimated $40 billion in capital gains to transfer between generations without ever being taxed. Not $40 million. $40 billion, invisible to the IRS at the moment of transfer. The Joint Committee on Taxation, the nonpartisan body that scores tax legislation, has estimated that eliminating stepped-up basis would generate more than $500 billion in federal revenue over 10 years. $500 billion sitting inside a rule that most Americans don't know exists. Now go back to 1976. The law passed. The window opened. And in the years between passage and repeal, something else happened quietly. Estate attorneys began advising the wealthiest families in the country to restructure their holdings. Trusts were rewritten. Assets were repositioned. Records were in some cases permanently obscured. When the repeal finally came, the window had already done its work. The families with the most exposure had adjusted. The rule died just as it was about to reach the people it was designed to touch. The inconvenience was never the paperwork. The inconvenience was the wealth it would have moved. Biden's Treasury Department tried again in 2021. The American Families Plan proposed taxing unrealized capital gains at death, a direct challenge to stepped-up basis. It was announced in April. By September, it had been stripped from the legislation. By November, it was gone. No floor vote. No sustained public debate. It vanished in committee. The families who benefit most from stepped-up basis are not the families with a single inherited house. They are the families with inherited portfolios, private equity stakes, commercial real estate, stock positions built across generations. Assets where the gap between what was paid and what it's worth now is measured in the tens of millions. Those families have lobbyists. They have estate attorneys. And in 1976, they had time. They have always had time. So here is what stays open. Who specifically drafted the language that suspended carryover basis in 1977? Which offices requested it? Which committee chairs signed off without a public vote? Those records exist somewhere. Every piece of legislation leaves a paper trail. The question is not whether stepped-up basis survives. It has survived every serious challenge for 50 years. The question is what is being restructured right now, in trust documents being rewritten this week, in holding companies being repositioned this month. While you're still learning that the rule to stop it was already passed once and buried before it could find you.